My fiancée humiliated me in front of her friends about my salary, so I ended the engagement and left her life forever. I'm a 28-year-old guy who always believed love meant showing up, staying loyal, and sacrificing quietly for the future you promised someone. From the moment we got engaged, I told myself I'd do anything to build the life she dreamed about, even if it meant exhausting 12-hour shifts at my modest office job while she floated between boutique appointments, brunches, and influencer-style photoshoots. I remember coming home with the smell of printer ink and cold street air clinging to my jacket, only to hear her say, "You're still working there?" My friend's boyfriend just got promoted twice this year, and I'd force a smile, pretending the words didn't sting. Inside, it felt like my worth shrank every time she laughed at my cute little paycheck, but I convinced myself she didn't mean harm. I kept thinking, she just wants us to be successful. She just wants better for us. So when she teased, "You're lucky I love you, broke boy," I'd chuckle too, even as my chest tightened and my hands curled into fists beside my thighs. I swallowed the humiliation like bitter medicine, telling myself peace was more important than pride. At night, lying beside her, I'd stare at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above us and whisper, "I'll get there, I promise. I'll be better." She would sigh and reply, "You have to, babe. I'm not marrying struggle." Her words echoed in my skull long after she drifted to sleep, leaving me staring at the faint glow of her phone screen still buzzing with messages from friends I didn't feel good enough to face. The truth I didn't want to admit was that I wasn't just trying to build a future, I was trying to earn permission to be loved. Every joke, every comparison, every sideways glance chipped away at something fragile inside me, yet I clung tighter, hoping devotion would fix what respect was already breaking. And the worst part was, I had no idea how quickly her quiet disrespect was about to turn into something far more public, and impossible to ignore. I'm a 28-year-old guy who started noticing that her jokes were no longer playful, just sharp little reminders that I didn't measure up to the world she wanted. When we went out with her friends, she'd deliberately steer the conversation toward money, promotions, luxury trips, then casually glance at me and say, "Must be nice having ambition, huh?" The restaurant lights felt too bright, the clinking of glasses too loud, and every laugh at the table scraped against my ears like sandpaper. "Relax, I'm just teasing," she said when I shifted uncomfortably. "It doesn't feel like teasing," I murmured, trying to keep my voice calm. "Oh my God, you're so sensitive," she scoffed. "This is why men like you stay stuck." Those words followed me home, echoing through our quiet apartment, where the air smelled of her sweet designer candles and my lukewarm takeout. I watched her scroll endlessly through glamorous photos of couples beside yachts and penthouses, her eyes glowing with envy, and I felt like I was standing in the shadow of a life she wanted but didn't believe I could give. Inside, a heavy knot tightened around my heart as I wondered when love turned into a silent competition. Instead of softening, she leaned further into the cruelty, calling me safe but limiting, whispering, "I just feel like I'm meant for more," like my presence was an anchor dragging her down. I nodded along, even when her words cut deep, because arguing meant risking everything we built. When I tried to open up and said, "I'm trying my best for us," she tilted her head and replied, "Your best isn't enough right now." I began pushing myself harder, taking on extra shifts, skipping dinners, calculating overtime and restless spirals of desperation. Yet in her eyes, my effort didn't look like devotion, it looked like proof I wasn't the man she wanted. The distance between us stretched wider with every forced smile and half-hearted apology she never made. And then, as laughter rose around the table one night, I heard her lean toward her friend and whisper something so casually cruel that my spine went cold, and I realized her disrespect was no longer subtle. I'm a 28-year-old guy who walked into that restaurant believing it was just another casual night out with her friends, not the place my dignity would be peeled apart in front of strangers. The air smelled of grilled meat and expensive perfume, and soft jazz hummed through dim lighting that made everything feel warm, everything except the chill forming in my chest. I remember pulling out her chair, trying to be the polite, devoted fiancé she rarely acknowledged, and she rolled her eyes, muttering, "You don't have to act like a 1950s husband, you know." The conversation drifted to careers and achievements, and the moment I dreaded arrived. One of her friends smiled too brightly and asked, "So what do you do again?" Before I could answer, she laughed and said, "He's still at that basic office job. You know, the one with the character-building salary." Laughter exploded around the table while my face burned like it had been slapped. I tried to joke it off. "It's honest work," I said softly. She smirked. "Honest, sure, but don't you want more than this?" She gestured vaguely at me, like I was a temporary inconvenience. My ears rang as forks scraped against plates and glasses clinked hollowly. Someone mumbled, awkward, and I felt every single word collapse onto my shoulders. I stared down at the polished table, watching reflections blur as my vision watered, while she leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the spotlight. "Babe, don't be mad," she added, waving a manicured hand. "I'm just being real. I can't live off dreams and discounts." Inside, something fragile cracked. I felt exposed, diminished, like my entire worth had been reduced to a punchline. My hands trembled under the table as I forced air into my lungs, the weight of every mocking glance crushing whatever pride I had left. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but instead I just sat there, silent, ashamed, and burning with a humiliation I couldn't hide. And as her laughter echoed, I realized this wasn't careless anymore, it was deliberate, and she wasn't done making a spectacle of me. I'm a 28-year-old guy who started to see my reflection differently after that night, like the mirror itself agreed with everything she'd said. The apartment felt colder, smaller, almost suffocating, and the soft glow of her vanity lights suddenly looked harsh against my tired eyes. I kept replaying her laughter, the way her friends smirked, the way I shrank in my own skin, and every time I thought I could breathe, another wave of shame rolled over me. "You're still sulking?" she asked, kicking off her heels as she walked past. "It was just a joke. You seriously need to toughen up." "It didn't feel like a joke," I whispered. She scoffed. "God, you always make everything so dramatic." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I started apologizing for things that weren't my fault, for my silence, for my exhaustion, even for my existence in her space. At work, I stared blankly at spreadsheets while my mind echoed her voice, basic, weak, not enough. The dull hum of the office printer felt louder, like it was mocking my stuck reality too. That night, I tried again. It hurt. "You embarrassed me," I said carefully, my voice trembling. She didn't even look up from her phone. "You embarrassed yourself for being so insecure. Normal men don't cry over comments." Something inside me curled into itself, like a wounded animal retreating deeper into the dark. I stopped smiling as much. I stopped dreaming out loud about our future. Every loving gesture I made felt heavier, like I was begging for a kindness she no longer knew how to give. Even the way she kissed me changed, quick, distracted, like obligation instead of warmth. I could feel the distance growing, thick and sharp between us, and yet I stayed, trapped by the idea that if I just tried harder, she'd remember why she chose me. But instead of softening, she started talking more openly about successful men she'd met, dropping their names with casual admiration that made my stomach twist. And as she laughed at something on her phone and casually muttered, "At least he knows how to make money," I realized my silence was becoming her favorite weapon, and she was preparing to use it again. I'm a 28-year-old guy who finally realized that swallowing my pain was slowly killing whatever respect I had left for myself. The air between us had grown thick with unsaid tension, like a storm waiting to break, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She sat on the edge of the couch scrolling through her phone, the glow illuminating her perfect makeup and indifferent expression, while my heart hammered painfully against my ribs. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but shaking. She didn't even look up. "About what now?" "About how you treat me, especially in front of your friends." A slow sigh escaped her lips, full of irritation. "You're still on that?" "Yes," I replied. "You humiliate me. You joke about my salary. You make me feel small." She finally glanced at me, eyes cold. "I make you feel small? Or are you just insecure because you are small-minded?" The words sliced through me. I swallowed hard. "I'm trying. I'm working my ass off for us." "For us," she scoffed. "You think that paycheck is building a future? I'm not signing myself into a life of mediocrity." The room felt heavy, like the walls themselves were leaning closer, listening to my humiliation. My hands trembled as I whispered, "I just wanted respect." She rolled her eyes. "Respect is earned, not begged for." Inside, my chest burned with a mix of anger and heartbreak, but all she saw was weakness. She stood up, pacing in frustration, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is," she snapped. You should be grateful I even stay with you. Grateful. The word echoed like a twisted joke. No, I said quietly. I just want you to stop treating me like I'm disposable. Her lips curled. If the shoe fits. Silence swallowed the room so completely I could hear my own shallow breathing. I realized then that every attempt to save us only gave her another chance to break me down. The woman I loved wasn't listening, she was defending her right to hurt me. And as she grabbed her phone and stormed toward the bedroom, muttering, "I swear, you make everything exhausting," I felt something shift deep inside me, something colder, sharper, and dangerously close to breaking. I'm a 28-year-old guy who never expected betrayal to hit me so quietly, so deliberately, like a knife slid between ribs while I was still trying to breathe for her. That evening, I returned home earlier than usual, my footsteps muffled against the hallway carpet, only to hear her voice drifting from the bedroom, light and amused, laced with a tone she never used with me. The door was slightly open, warm yellow light spilling onto the floor, and instinct told me to stop. "She's still with him," one of her friends laughed over speaker. "Of course," she replied lazily. "He's stable, predictable, he pays bills without complaining. It's convenient for now." "For now," her friend teased. "Yeah," she sighed. "I'm not stupid. I know my worth. Once someone better comes along, I'm not settling." My chest tightened so violently I thought I might collapse. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the cool paint against clammy skin, as her next words shredded everything I believed. "He's sweet," she added, almost bored. "But honestly? He's a placeholder. Safe until I upgrade." Placeholder. Upgrade. My heart pounded louder than her laughter, the room spinning as I realized every tender moment, every sacrifice, every whispered promise had been nothing but a temporary arrangement. I wasn't her partner. I was her safety net. Her emergency plan. Her backup life. A wave of nausea rolled through me as I listened, frozen, while she continued casually gossiping about how men like me were emotionally useful but never the final choice. The scent of her expensive perfume drifted into the hallway, now sickening instead of comforting, wrapping around memories that suddenly felt fake and hollow. I stepped back slowly, careful not to let the floor creak, my thoughts fractured into sharp, broken pieces. She never loved me. The truth burned hotter than any insult she'd ever thrown my way. Every time she'd said "I love you," every forced smile, every cruel joke, it all made sense now. As the call ended and her footsteps approached the door, my pulse raced, anger and devastation twisting into something new, something dangerous and awakening. And I stood there, heart pounding, knowing if she opened that door, everything between us would change forever. I'm a 28-year-old guy who walked back into our apartment with a face so calm it almost scared me more than the rage boiling underneath. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't demand answers. I just nodded when she glanced up and said, "You're home early," like nothing had shattered inside me. The living room smelled faintly of her floral diffuser, the same scent that once felt comforting, now thick and suffocating, like a lie suspended in air. "Everything okay?" she asked, stretching lazily. "Yeah," I replied, too evenly. "Just tired." Inside, my heart was unraveling thread by thread, but outwardly, I became still. I stopped trying to impress her, stopped explaining my day, stopped whispering reassurances before sleep. My words grew shorter. My touch faded. I watched her notice the shift, confusion flickering behind her eyes as my devotion slowly evaporated into silence. "You've been weird lately," she muttered one night, turning toward me in bed. "Maybe I'm just learning," I said quietly. She frowned, studying me like a new inconvenience. "Learning what?" I didn't answer. Instead, I started pulling my energy inward, focusing on myself, my breath, my heartbeat, my quiet resolve. I woke up earlier, left without kisses, returned home without eagerness. The apartment felt heavier, colder, as if my absence created a vacuum even when I was still standing there. I watched her grow irritated by my distance, her voice sharper, her patience thinner, like she couldn't understand why her emotional puppet suddenly stopped responding. "What's your problem lately?" she snapped as we passed in the kitchen. "No problem," I said. "Just busy." But the truth was, I wasn't busy, I was waking up. Every moment of forced calm was a shield, every neutral response a quiet step towards something inevitable. I was observing her now, not as my future wife, but as someone who showed me exactly who she was when she believed she had power. And as she stared at me across the room with narrowed eyes and whispered, "You're acting distant for a reason," I realized she was finally sensing the shift, and she wasn't about to let control slip away without a fight. I'm a 28-year-old guy who realized calm only made her cruelty sharper, like my silence challenged her authority over me. The tension in our apartment felt electric, buzzing through the air every time our eyes met, and I could see frustration brewing in the tight line of her lips, the restless tapping of her manicured nails against her phone. She hated not being in control, and the more distant I became, the more she lashed out, like a storm desperate for destruction. It happened at another gathering, another circle of her perfectly dressed friends, another night I should have walked away from but didn't. Music pulsed softly in the background, glasses clinked, laughter flowed, and there she stood beside me, her arm casually draped over my shoulder like a trophy she no longer respected. Someone asked about wedding plans, and she smirked, eyes flicking toward me with open amusement. "Well," she said loudly, "I just hope he figures out how to become a real provider before the big day. I don't want to end up married to a charity case." The room froze. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Wow," one of her friends murmured, half laughing, half awkward. She shrugged. "I'm just being honest. Someone has to push him, right?" Something inside me snapped so cleanly it felt almost peaceful. The humiliation didn't sting anymore, it burned, raw and undeniable, forming into icy clarity. I felt every eye on me, every judgment, every whisper, but for the first time, I didn't look down. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not my fiancée, but my emotional executioner. "Are you done?" I asked quietly. She blinked, surprised by my tone. "What? Are you finished making entertainment out of me?" A ripple of uneasy silence spread through the room, and her confident expression faltered just slightly. Her friends exchanged glances, unsure whether this was another joke or something darker unfolding. I straightened my back, chest rising with a calm that terrified even me, and she narrowed her eyes, sensing the power shift she never expected. And as she opened her mouth to fire back, I knew this moment wasn't ending the way she thought it would. I'm a 28-year-old guy who didn't argue with her that night, not because I forgave her, but because I felt something inside me finally give up. We left the gathering in silence, the night air cold and biting against my skin, the city lights blurring through a fog of exhaustion and emotional collapse. She walked ahead, heels clicking sharply against the pavement, muttering under her breath about how I'd embarrassed her for overreacting. "You ruined the vibe," she snapped once we got into the car. "You always make things uncomfortable when you get emotional." I just stared out the window, my reflection pale and hollow, like a stranger looking back. By the time we reached the apartment, I felt completely drained, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped everything warm out. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, while she threw her purse onto the dresser with a dramatic sigh. The familiar hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the hallway light pressed in around me, suffocating and heavy. "You're seriously not going to apologize?" she asked. "For what?" I whispered. "For making me look like the bad guy." That was the moment the realization crushed me. In her world, my pain didn't exist. My humiliation was an inconvenience. My heartbreak was a personality flaw. I wasn't her partner, I was her problem. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, hot and uncontrollable, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door, gripping the sink as my body trembled violently. The harsh fluorescent light made my skin look dull, my eyes bloodshot, my expression broken beyond recognition. I barely recognized the man staring back. "What happened to you?" I whispered to my reflection, voice cracking. I slid down against the tile, sitting on the cold floor, finally letting the tears spill silently, shoulders shaking as every insult, every comparison, every cruel laugh replayed on repeat. This wasn't love. This was slow erosion of the soul, and I let it happen because I was scared of being alone. And as she knocked once on the door and muttered, "Get over it," seriously, I realized I had reached the lowest point of my dignity, and I didn't know if I had the strength left to climb out. I'm a 28-year-old guy who sat on that cold bathroom floor long after the tears dried, staring at the faint cracks in the tile like they somehow held answers I didn't. My chest felt hollow, but beneath that emptiness, something unfamiliar slowly stirred, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. The kind that aches, the kind that whispers, "You can't live like this anymore." When I finally unlocked the door, she was already back on the bed scrolling through her phone, completely unbothered, as if my breakdown had been nothing more than a commercial break in her evening. The glow from the screen reflected off her perfectly polished nails, and the sight made my stomach twist harder than any insult. "You done being dramatic?" she asked without looking up. "I wasn't being dramatic," I said quietly. "I was breaking." She scoffed. "You're too soft. This is real life. Grow up." Her words landed, but this time something was different. They didn't crush me. They confirmed everything I'd already realized. I looked around the room, the picture frames of fake smiles, the decorative pillows I'd bought to please her, the expensive perfume bottles lining the dresser, and I understood none of it felt like home anymore. "I don't think you even see me as a person," I said, my voice calm but firm. She finally glanced up, unimpressed. "What are you talking about now?" I inhaled slowly, the air tasting heavy, like rain before a storm. "I'm not your placeholder. I'm not your charity case. And I'm not your emotional punching bag." Her eyebrows knit. "You're overthinking again." No. I wasn't. For the first time in months, my thoughts were sharp and steady. I felt a quiet resolve forming, a decision that no longer terrified me but instead brought a strange sense of relief. I stood there, looking at her, really looking, and realized I didn't feel love anymore. I felt done. "I can't marry someone who enjoys humiliating me," I whispered. She laughed under her breath. "You're not serious." But I was. Every muscle in my body knew it before my heart fully caught up. I turned away before she could see the weight of what I'd just chosen, knowing the next step would change everything we thought we were building, and she had no idea what was coming. I'm a 28-year-old guy who asked her to meet me the next evening at the same restaurant where she'd laughed at my worth like it was a joke. The air was thick with anticipation, rain misting the pavement outside, neon lights reflecting off wet concrete as her friends gathered around the table again, unaware that this time, I wasn't there to play along. My heartbeat was steady, almost eerily calm, like my soul had already mourned something before my body caught up. "You look tense," she said smugly as she sat beside me. "Relax, I'm not here to fight." I glanced around at the familiar faces, the same ones who once watched me shrink, and felt a strange sense of clarity settle in my chest. "I asked everyone here for a reason," I began, my voice level. Her smirk faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" I stood, the chair scraping softly behind me, and the room fell quiet almost instantly. "I've spent too long letting myself be humiliated for loving someone who only saw me as temporary." Gasps rippled through the room. "You called me a charity case. You called me a placeholder. You laughed at my ambition like it was weakness." She scoffed nervously. "You're exaggerating." "No," I replied. "I'm finally being honest." Her friend shifted uncomfortably as I continued, my voice unwavering. "I loved you. I sacrificed for you. But you treated my loyalty like a joke and my heart like a backup plan." "Sit down," she hissed under her breath. "You're embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed at the irony. "No," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming my dignity." Her posture stiffened, eyes darting around the table as murmurs grew louder. "You're not seriously doing this right now." "I am," I confirmed. "The engagement is over." Silence swallowed the room whole, so thick I could hear someone's fork tremble against a plate. Her face drained of color, the confident mask finally cracking as panic flickered behind her eyes. "Wait, you don't mean that," she whispered. But I did. And as she reached out instinctively, her hand trembling toward mine, I stepped back, knowing the moment she truly understood what she'd lost was still seconds away. I'm a 28-year-old guy who walked out into the damp night air with a strange heaviness lifting off my chest, like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. The rain kissed my skin softly, cool and grounding, and the city lights shimmered around me like a quiet reminder that life still moved forward, even after everything I let break me. Behind me, I could still hear her voice cracking, pleading, "You're making a mistake, we can fix this." But something inside me had gone quiet, peaceful, beyond persuasion. "I'm not fixing something that enjoyed destroying me," I said without turning back. For the first time in months, I felt the air enter my lungs fully, not sharp or panicked, just steady. I walked past her stunned friends, past the restaurant where my self-worth had once been reduced to a punchline, and with every step, I felt a little more like myself again. The smell of wet asphalt and distant traffic blended into the night as I unlocked my car, my fingers no longer trembling. Inside, silence wrapped around me, not the suffocating kind, but a calm one. I rested my head against the steering wheel and whispered, "You survived," like a promise I intended to keep. Memories still stung, her laughter still echoed faintly in my mind, but they no longer controlled my breath. In the following days, her texts flooded in: apologies, anger, promises of change. "Please, I didn't mean it like that. You're overreacting, come back. I miss you." I read each one with steady eyes and chose not to reply. Closure didn't come from her words. It came from the quiet strength growing in my chest, the realization that love doesn't belittle, and loyalty doesn't humiliate. I started rebuilding my routines, my confidence, my sense of self, piece by piece, like stitching together a scar that no longer bled. Yet as I stood on my balcony weeks later, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across the sky, a thought lingered in the back of my mind. The pain was fading, but the memory of how easily someone I loved destroyed me still whispered softly. And I wondered, not with fear but with strength, who I would become next, now that I finally chose myself.